Okay, looks like we're live. Good morning, everybody. Hi, this is Steve Sapdowski, publisher of BuzzBuzz.com. Pardon me, and we're going to be talking about what looks like pretty late breaking news with Christopher Chidmore and Jim Brown. We're initially going to be talking about the Louisiana legislature, but something just broke on the air, and I think that a lot of people local people have a keen interest in this, and that's the question of uh, the possibility of Steve Scalise becoming next Speaker of the House because of some, again, breaking news. Good morning, Christopher, and good morning, Jim. How y'all doing?
Fine, Steve. Glad to be here with you this morning.
Okay, so
Always a privilege.
Christopher, let me ask
See,
you to start it off and to tell us about what you know at this point in time that we just briefly talked about in terms of Steve Scalise and Speaker Ryan.
well, people have been saying for months, members of his staff, close friends of Paul Ryan, that he was tired. He had made his wife a promise to spend more time with his kids as they entered their teen years. He was working hellacious hours, as you do when you're Speaker of the House, and it was one of the promises that he made his wife he wouldn't do when he assumed the office. Remember, Paul Ryan didn't run for Speaker so much as it was thrust upon him. And he's been thinking about it. But there had been thoughts that if Paul Ryan left the office, it would weaken the GOP position for reelection coming into the midterms. Well, right now, with 55 seats, the Democrats leading in 30, it's going to take something of a Hail Mary pass to win Paul Ryan or not. The question is the Hail Mary pass Steve Scalise of old Jefferson? Well, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people in the caucus who believe that Steve Scalise's personal story, having been shot, recovering, his countenance, his personality, his ability to be sort of the anti-Trump, sort of, aw shucks, this is how it really is, might be a curative going into a very difficult midterms. Scalise himself, while not denying an interest in the Speaker's job, has been very blunt that he will not run against Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader, if Kevin McCarthy wants the job. Understand that Representative McCarthy is a close friend of Steve Scalise's. When Scalise decided to run for Congress, even before then, Kevin McCarthy came down to Louisiana. Scalise showed him around the Louisiana legislature, and the two of them struck up a friendship to the where McCarthy endorsed Scalise early on. He's been a supporter of Scalise to become whip, to move up through the conference. And this is something that if McCarthy wants it, he gets it. He's the next speaker. However, Scalise is a lot more popular with the Trump administration than McCarthy is. There was an interesting incident recently where the president got up and everybody rose, and he came out and publicly said, McCarthy, you got to go faster. Scalise was up before you have. And he was, and the president has, as we saw from the State of the Union, pointed out Steve Scalise. There is a question: will the conference actually force Scalise into the Speaker's job? It's also true, and I'll defer to Jim on this, that Scalise, no one knows a conference like a whip. I mean, I hate to point out the House of Cards example, but the whip knows where all the bodies are buried. But Scalise has really learned his conference, the members of the Republican Party in the House, and he's extremely popular with them. So there's a lot of saying that there may be forced to put it in. There's certainly no denying that Steve Scalise has had his eye on the speakership for some time. He's just very loyal to his friend. And Jim knows the personality of Steve Scalise and how he interacts with people even better than I.
Okay, Jim, take it over.
Well, following up what Chris said, yeah, Steve Scalise could be one of the most personable elected officials that we have in Louisiana. I know that I watched him very closely at the Washington Mardi Gras Ball a couple of years ago. Took my daughter up there, and we stood over the side of the room. My daughter, who used to be host on CNN, the Today Show, very observant of politicians nationally, was amazed at how he related. The old Bill Clinton trick of looking someone directly in the eye, even though you're surrounded by hundreds of people. And Steve worked that room in a very special way, and Campbell and I were very impressed with how well he did. and that covers over to how he deals, as Christopher said, with individual legislators. With the whip, you give out the campaign cash. You deal on a regular basis, much more so than the majority leader does with individual members of the House. And so you build up a rapport, a special relationship, and Steve's a very likable guy. And then, of course, this huge flow of sympathy and the way he handled the shooting also plays into his favor. Two quick comment. I guess the downside, as Christopher said, is his loyalty to McCarthy, and how that will play out. Will there be pressure within the other members of Congress to push McCarthy out? I think it's going to take a real internal push to push McCarthy aside and go with Scalise. And to some people, I think there may be a feeling of how well he's going to be able to hold up. You've got all these bullets in you like he has. He's put on a great face, but the fact remains that's got to be terribly tiring on your body. Does Steve want to take that on and go through the pressures, as Christopher referred to, of the tremendous day in, day out scheduling you'd have to do as Speaker? Is his physical situation, is he capable of doing that? That's something only Steve knows, and whether he'll want to back that off. As a side note, though, history kind of plays with Scalise a little bit. Of all the congressional districts in America, the focus of Jefferson Parish line, Orleans Parish, has been the focus of a lot of activity leading towards the Speaker. Hale Boggs was on the track to be Speaker. He was majority leader, represented both Orleans and Jefferson Parish, killed in October 16th, 1972. Remember it well because I was over in Paris, France with some of their legislators. And we got the word that Hale Boggs' plane went down. He was destined to be Speaker of the House, and that was cut short. Then we had Bob Livingston that was ascending to the speakership. Christopher was at 1994, I believe.
Yeah.
And, he had to step down because of some problems in his personal life, and very popular guy. So,
on the day of the Clinton impeachment in the House, and that was one of the most dramatic moments in American political history. You know, where they yelled, "You resign," and he looks up, says, "Therefore I shall resign." You know, it was a great moment, but bad for Louisiana, to say the least. You know,
well, there's that was just in the last, say, 35, 40 years that we're almost Speaker from the greater New Orleans area. So either that's a curse or maybe three's a charm. And it's the third one. So it's either three's a charm or it's a curse in terms of whether he'll rise. Very popular guy. And to you, Steve, I might say this. I think that there's going to be a lot of jockeying going on in the next several days of Steve Scalise being very differential to McCarthy and saying, of course, he has the first right of raising to the speakership. But what will be the internal politics in the background of those who would rather have Scalise? What will the Trump people do? What will the internal lobbying going? It'd be a fascinating thing to be involved in the internal debates going on within the Republican caucuses. And so there may be some, for Scalise to win, there's going to be almost a mini uprising amongst, say, more conservative Republicans, the Trump people. You put all that together to let McCarthy know, well, maybe I can't pull this off. So we're going to see some real jockeying going on the next several days.
And there is one motive, Steve, if I can be, sure, as to why McCarthy might want this to happen. Let's be a little Machiavellian here for a second. If he allows Steve Scalise to become Speaker and the GOP loses the House, McCarthy doesn't have to give up his majority that would become minority leader position. The Speaker's job is gone. He would have to voluntarily go back. The whip's position, presumably even going into an election, would be filled. So there's an argument that if you're Kevin McCarthy and you, instead of fighting your friend, let him have it. You know, I think of the old commercial, let her have it, because what they're getting may be something of a poisoned chalice. It's great if the GOP holds on to the House. But if these predictions are right, that the Pennsylvania redistricting has essentially put a stake into the heart of Republican chances when matched with the 25 seats that Hillary Clinton won and the 27 seats that Republicans are upside down in, their 24 seats that the Democrats must win to win the House, then there's an argument for McCarthy to let Scalise be the point man, and he's safe and secure as House Minority Leader of what would arguably be, even if the Republicans lose, it's a very narrow Democratic majority. So the minority leader still has quite a lot of influence on any other second-tier bill. I don't know how that plays out. I don't know. I think this is going to be pretty much a call of the president. If President Trump wants Scalise with his support, it's going to be very, very difficult for Kevin McCarthy to stand up against that. It would take Steve Scalise saying, I will never, ever, ever want to be speaker. And short of Kevin McCarthy saying, I want it so much, I can't see that scenario happening.
And Steve, that's another thing I think that's interesting in terms of Trump. Here's a guy that is just, it seems like every single day there is a death knell on him in terms of his political appeal, some new scandal breaking, but he still hangs on and survives when it comes to, he's still the president, and he's the president for several more years. And when the whole election came around initially, he's a new guy on the block. He's not new anymore. So, Steve, I agree with you. I think Trump's going to have a lot to say about it. And he's got a certain amount of loyalty that can't just maybe elect the speaker, but starts the momentum for Scalise if Trump wants to do so. So Trump's role in this whole speakership is going to be very interesting to watch because he's going to be a player, and I think that he can make a huge difference.
Okay, if anybody has a comment or question, please forgive me. Apparently, we have some information up there from a prior program about global warming, but I think everybody can see that that person is not on our program today. We do have, let's see, Renee Baker, Jim, good conversation. Kim Chevenet, hey JB. So if anybody has a question, comment, etc., we want to hear from you. This is I think very important information. Real speculation in terms of whether or not Steve Scalise would be the speaker, assuming that Paul Ryan does decide to not run. And it looks like, based upon all of the news that's coming out right now, NBC has broken the information that it's been confirmed that Paul Ryan is not going to run. So again, if anybody has anything they want to add to this conversation, we're going to be talking about the Louisiana legislature in just a couple seconds. That was the purpose of the discussion this morning. But this thing broke, and I just thought there was something that everybody would want to at least sort of chime in about.
Steve, could I add one thing
Sure.
to you about? It's this kind of a contradiction that Louisiana always rises in certain times of the year or when certain things happen. If you go back a few years back, our congressional delegations seemed to be a minor focus in terms of what happened in Washington. And we just weren't a national player, if you will, in terms of politics. There's a little sense of rising of the Bayou State. You've got Scalise possibly being speaker. You've got Senator John Kennedy. Whether you like him or not like him, he's making an impact in Washington, D.C. I mean, the national news all over the country was Kennedy questioning Mark Zuckerberg and their photographs. And every week there's something involving our U.S. senator that is making a national impact. Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, is doing a national tour and being touted by a number of folks as possibly being a presidential candidate. Governor John Bel Edwards, the only Democrat in the entire South, is making a pretty good national impact. So Louisiana is becoming more of a player on the national scene, or if you go back 20 years, it was a major player. Then there was a lull of 8 or 10 years where we really weren't all that relevant what's going on in Washington, D.C. That's changed right now, and hopefully for the better, and hopefully it'll benefit the state in a number of ways.
I have to say though this, and it comes to the curse, and I'm hoping it's 3 times a charm, not 3 times a curse for Steve Scalise. But I remember the press conference that Bob Livingston back in 1993. Bob Livingston was going to resign, or he was actually not going to finish out his term. He was going to go into the private sector, and as the Washington euphemism is, make some money. And he had scheduled a press conference, and he ends up having calls from everyone: Democrats, Republicans. Right. At the time, of course, he's chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And finally, the last call came from Archbishop Hannon. And the Archbishop says, "We need you." And that was enough. And Bob Livingston showed up at the press conference to say, I am going to stay in Congress. That was the whole press conference, only to turn around a couple months later, and it looked, Newt Gingrich left. He was the favorite to be speaker. It was a foregone conclusion. And we in Louisiana were so excited. Finally, the promise of hail bogs, the promise that we would have a position of influence that would frankly bring home the bacon. Remember, when Livingston was in office as Appropriations Committee chairman, a lot of things opened up for Louisiana. We put back the Canal Street streetcar. We did a lot of things around the state. And then it got pulled out from under us at quite literally the last second. Okay, so the question I got is, will we see a possibility of Steve Scalise being in power, being pulled out at the last second, not just to wait his turn, but because of some unforeseen factor? That is part of the history as well. So,
okay, let's just touch on one thing before we go talk about Louisiana legislature, and that is, as y'all mentioned, it looks like there may be a blue wave. Maybe. I mean, because who knows what's going to happen? Now 5 months from now, 6 months from now, 7 months actually. So. What type of, do you think this announcement or this information that we're getting from the media, do you think that this will divide the Republican Party that much more, especially given the fact that, as we mentioned, President Trump is certainly making daily news in terms of this is Scandal City. So I'm just wondering whether or not this is good for the Republican Party in terms of Paul Ryan.
I don't know if it's good for the Republican Party. I think it opens up some opportunities for a number of strong conservative Republicans who have very tight, hard feelings about budgetary issues and about the direction the country's going. When they got to Washington, you want to get committee assignments and you want to halfway get along. And so when Ryan was the speaker and he was there, you didn't want to buck the establishment. I think there's going to be more opportunities now to buck the establishment. You've got a weakened president. You don't have a speaker. You've got a lot of conservative Republicans who may want to flex their muscle right now. So the job of the majority leader and those in charge of Congress is, how do you keep this coalition together and not let splinters take off in a time of real turbulence up in D.C. right now? So I think that Ryan stepping down is going to give a little bit more opening for conservative Republicans to express themselves, talk about a different kind of caucus that may form. A lot of jockeying going on for this to play out in the next few weeks, Steve.
Okay, just to piggyback on that,
can I add something to that?
Hold on, because I'm going to just tie this in and then go ahead and respond, if you don't mind. And that is that, okay, so we have a situation right now where there are threats of the president actually getting rid of Rosenstein and or Bob Mueller through Rosenstein in whatever way that happens. There are counterclaims of coming primarily from Democrats, but also Republicans, saying don't do that. Don't do that. You're really going to be walking on eggs if you do that. So now with the speaker basically, in a sense, declawed, what impact would that have in that scenario? Okay, go on, Christopher.
Well, first of all, I mean, the fundamental question is, will Paul Ryan remain Speaker? We know for the remainder of the term. We know he's not going to leave Congress and resign early. He said that. But he can just as easily carry on as a backbencher, do a victory lap without having to worry about defeat. I think we don't know about whether Bob Mueller will be fired. The president seems, at least according to sources, to think he can do it. Whether or not that happens, that is the one thing that will blow Washington into smithereens. The entire caucus will go crazy. I think the magic word, though, for today, and what I was getting at to Jim's comment about conservatives, is the following word: REICCISSION, recession, not recession, recession. The idea that the 1974 Budget Act allows the president to hold back spending for 45 days based on a resolution of both houses of Congress. Now, why do I bring up something so arcane? Because the House Freedom Caucus is so angry at this budget deal, so furious, that they want the president to use his recession power to be able to hold back that spending. It's the modern version of the old impound power, and put it before the House. The reason you haven't seen it is not because Trump doesn't want to do it. It's because there's no guarantee it would get through the Senate. And so then you reserve it for 45 days and everybody looks like an idiot when it's spent anyway. So I think if there is a speaker's contest, one of the things the House Freedom Caucus is going to say is, Kevin McCarthy, are you in favor of recession? And if he's not, and so far I've seen Majority Leader McCarthy just like Paul Ryan, very skeptical about this idea, thinking it would blow up in the GOP's face, and they're probably right. Scalise, however, has close ties, and this is what Jim was referencing, with the Tea Party. He's got good relationships with it. He's a little bit more fiscally conservative, and this may be the branch that forces the entire tree to fall. And if that happens and you have the other factors, then it goes to Scalise's favor going into the election. Having said that, God knows the average midterm election has 40 Democratic, is usually a swing of 40 seats in the House. 40 seats is a lot. That would be more than enough for the Democrats to comfortably take control, and they only need 24. The difference in this election season is, for the first time in recent American history, not eternally, but recently, people are tending to vote party ID more than they vote locally. The old Tip O'Neill admonition, all politics is local, is not really applying as much as it used to. And the Republicans are turning the election around just to what you said, and said, if the Democrats get power, they will impeach Donald Trump. They're trying to encourage their base to come out almost as if this is a presidential race. And in other words, saying, this is not where you're teaching the president a lesson. This is the first step of the 2020 presidential race. You better get motivated. Will it work? It's a heck of a gamble. But it's the one thing that you don't usually see. The defending party usually wants to be all politics is local, send the pork home, get the things in. The Republican caucus is getting more unified behind Trump, not less, because they are so running scared. It is forcing them to hold together in a way that they haven't before, regardless of who's speaker.
I agree. I think Chris is right on, and you're not going to see the Republicans in the House get a majority to impeach Donald Trump. I don't even think with the fall off, if all the Democrats go and because exactly what you're saying, Chris, I think, and the process works slowly anyway. Any effort to impeach the president, I don't care what he does, is going to probably take place after the coming election, because so many of these House members, particularly more conservative House members, don't want to be caught in the center. Now, it's a new ball game if the Democrats take over, but if the Republicans continue to hold the Senate, then the ball game is in the Senate, and how Trump handles his whole Republican contingent in the Senate to stop something like that, along the lines of Clinton. Clinton was impeached by the House, but the Senate failed to go ahead and follow through along those lines. So number one, I don't think I think that the president's getting his mileage out of beating up on Mueller, saying it's just all partisan and not making it a Democratic Republican thing. And even though the president was the cause of Mueller being the special prosecutor by his appointments of the attorney general. I think he gains a lot in his mind by being on the negative all the time, beating up on Mueller. He's not going to fire him, going to continue to beat up on him a lot more, let this play out till after the next election, then we start from square one again.
So what if, here's my last question on the issue, and that is, so what if he does fire Rosenstein, who basically controls this, or fires Rosenstein and Mueller, or shuts it down in one of those ways? What if that happens and you have a constitutional crisis? I mean, you don't think that the Republicans are going to? You don't think the Republicans will stand up and just say, "Okay, you've gone too far"?
Well, I've heard members personally say that that's their line, that they won't do it. But terror of losing, terror of being out of office makes people behave in very non-orthodox manners. And I'm not so sure the president's going to fire Bob Mueller. And maybe I'm wrong. God only knows he wants to. But I think that he's got enough of his own party saying this is a line you can't cross, that maybe even Trump can realize this will go through. Having said that, if he fires Mueller, and Rosenstein could resign at that point or something, I don't think he's going to fire Rosenstein as much as he dislikes him. If that happens, another thing could have happened, which is just simply the Republicans came through and said accurately, the president has the constitutional power to do this. This isn't actually, we keep using terms like constitutional crisis or unconstitutional. These are employees, these are non-classified employees of the executive branch. He has the constitutional power to fire them. It's a political problem. It is unorthodox. It's unethical, but it's not illegal.
Well, sure it is.
And no. We can get in a whole back and forth, a Dershowitz argument. But what I'm telling you is, right now, if he fires Mueller and he fires Rosenstein, the Supreme Court is not going to say reinstate them, not before the elections, and that's what we're talking about.
So
my point is, in that scenario, the Republicans may be so terrible. It's not like he's getting any points with the Democrats. They may turn around and say, you know what, the president has the right to fire them. That's it. It was politically motivated, and double down on what Jim says, which is basically this is a, quote, political witch hunt. I don't know if it is. I don't think it is. But that argument goes well with the base. And then spin that saying he did this because all Mueller was doing was trying to get the Democrats to impeach him, and turn it into an election issue. And to be honest with you, I think it's probably, in political terms, going to be less of an explosive situation than people think. I still think it's terrible for Trump to do it and politically dangerous. But I also believe that, honestly, Steve, he could probably weather it. I don't know if the Republican majority will weather it, but he can weather it until the midterms. Okay. And that's as far as Trump sees.
Okay. So let's move on to the Louisiana legislature. Jim, go ahead, please.
Want to talk about the legislature itself?
Sure.
Well, so much going on. We can do another whole program on this in terms of the legislature. And I got up early this morning and finished a column about one of the big issues in the legislature. It'll be on Bayou Buzz tomorrow about this whole casino gambling effort going on right now. The huge expansion. I think there's 8 different pieces of legislation involving expansion of casino gambling. And I can see why we don't have enough gambling of all sorts in this state. But we've got 15 land-based casinos. There are 15 riverboat casinos that the legislation wants to expand and go on shore. An effort to put a casino over in Tangipahoa Parish. There's 1,000 video poker machines going on around the state right now. Horse racing, a big land-based casino in New Orleans. We certainly need a lot more gambling here in the state. And but in any event, there's a major effort by the gambling industry and we're talking about sports betting now, possibly coming into Louisiana. And the focus of my column was, Steve, that just to share, if I can, briefly, and I'll let Chris comment on it. That if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, we had kind of a level flow of activity in a cross section of states for Virginia, coming down through the Gulf Coast over to Texas. we all were in about the same situation. Then the oil boom hit, and Louisiana took off with all this money. Well, there was no oil money in Georgia, in Alabama, but we relied on the oil money, got a little jump. Then casino gambling came in, and I think it's interesting. The only two states in the South that have major casino gambling are Mississippi and Louisiana. They're also the only two states that are the two states in the South are at the very bottom of the barrel of every national list. And so rather than really sitting down with any kind of specific plan and any vision to say, look, we've got to train our base, we've got to train our folks to be more competitive as they've done in Alabama, as they've done in Georgia, as they're doing over in Texas. No, we just want the quick fix with casino gambling, let the money come in and keep them fat, dumb, and happy, give them dome stadiums and entertain them down there, and they're okay. And so that's the focus of my column. But the point you want to talk about is that casino gambling is a front burner issue in the legislature. If you go down there, you're going to see lobbyists for casino gambling for gambling interests involving sports betting, all kinds of interests, all over that legislature right now, more so than practically any other lobbying group. That's an issue there. I don't think we need more gambling. It'll be on Bayou Buzz tomorrow, by the way, but that's a major issue in this legislative session. The other thing that I just want to throw out, too, that I think folks may focus on today is the death penalty. Do we abolish the death penalty in Louisiana? And there's a major push. Senate committee got out a piece of legislation to abolish the death penalty. For the first time, there seems to be some momentum about abolishing the death penalty. And very controversial. I think I've seen studies that compared to our population, we have an awful lot of people on death row. We also have had more examples of prosecutorial misconduct that have freed people on death row in Louisiana than practically any other state in the country. So all this will come out in the debates. And I see casino gambling and the death penalty as two very substantive issues that are going to get a lot of attention, along, of course, with the budget. So I just throw that out as a beginning point.
Okay, Chris.
Well, and I would point out an interesting thing is happening on the death penalty that happened on criminal justice reform. Some of the people that are sort of allowing the death penalty abolition legislation to go through, I don't know if it'll pass, are conservative Republicans. And part of it is not just the thought of disproportional use to African Americans that comes to it. Part of it's the cost. It's budgetary. And part of it's the pro-life movement. There's and it doesn't get a lot of play in the press, but there's a huge section of the pro-life movement, the Catholic section of it really, that is just as uncomfortable with the death penalty as they are with abortion. And so the only reason why you're seeing this move in this very conservative legislature is it's not just the Black Caucus members, the more liberal white members, those few that there are. It's some Republicans who are saying, it doesn't make budgetary sense and it doesn't make actual spiritual sense as a citizen. So we'll see if it gets through the legislature. I think Jim brought it up because it's received very little coverage, and it would make historic news if it went through. I mean, as for gambling, our late friend C.B. Ferguson pointed out, before we had, quote, legalized gaming, we had more gambling in this state than Mississippi did after it got the casinos because of horse racing and some of our other elements. The fact is, though, we have, as Jim said, always looked for a silver bullet. There's a wonderful World Bank study called The Curse of Oil Prosperity, and how nations that had huge amounts of oil ended up not investing in education, just sort of going through until it went away. We've just looked for the next thing. 30 years ago, when we put together the casino bills, it seemed like this was going to be the next big thing. And frankly, there's a new study called the Tricentennial Prosperity Index that just came out that basically says, while we've made strides since Katrina, Rita, and Gustav, Louisiana still is at the bottom of the barrel investing in education, and we've cut university funding in half since 2008. So that the silver bullet that gets you out of these things, while the rest of our southern neighbors, that's the one thing they didn't cut. They put more money into education, whether it's Texas, Florida, Virginia, Georgia. We didn't. Amidst all of this gaming prosperity, it's a question of priorities. And the question of priorities, Mr. Sabadowski, is what I bring up, because besides the two bills we talked about, we're 53 full days until the end of the regular session. Somehow, some way, we have to declare sine die, as Jim loves to say, his favorite two words, end of the legislative session. He used to, when we did a radio show, and then when I produced his radio show in WRNO, he used to love to talk about sine die. It's a great term to mean, let's get the heck out of here. And then go into a special session to see whether or not we're going to raise taxes. It means we don't have a lot of time to consider regular business, regular bills. So what are the bills that we are actually talking about that are clearing committee? Let me give you some just in the last week. A massive piece of legislation allowing teachers to join student-led sponsored prayer, as if there's a massive problem on this. And not that I have anything against it, but we actually are scheduling floor time to debate this. A bill to combat bestiality, because that's a major problem in Louisiana. That cleared committee, going to the floor. A Senate bill to require the display of "In God We Trust." This is Regina Barrow's SB 224 on every state building. The problem is the way it's written. It's not like state office buildings. It would be every state structure. So the toilets at the various state parks would have to have "In God We Trust." I would think that would be kind of an interesting thing to walk into them. And of course, that quintessential important piece of legislation, the removing of licensing from florists, because this is a major problem. A whopping 25% of applicants to floral licenses fail. That means only 75% pass. Now, I admit we're the only state in the country that licensed florists is probably stupid, but with all the other things that we have to deal with, we're not. These things should have shown up in committee. Obviously, somebody's going to follow them and say, we don't have time for it. Refile them in 2 years, the next regular session. And let's worry about the major issues on the floor that we absolutely have to deal with, get the budget through, and go to the special session, and let's get a consensus on what we want to do. Well, you know what's happened? The reason why we're doing all of this, looking at all these ridiculous sort of tertiary issues, is because there's a curious game of chicken going on right now. And that's my column that I'm coming out with this week. It's where the head of the Appropriations Commission, Cameron Henry, legitimately, and House conservatives legitimately believe that state hospitals, the state private operators, are not going to walk if we take the state contribution away from them. They think that if the taxes are not approved in the regular session, and these things are defunded in the budget to the tune of about $180 million, that we're not going to lose the private operators. These hospitals will continue to operate. And the argument is, well, they're making money anyway. Do they really need the money? Bobby Jindal gave them too much money in these private contracts. The problem is every state operator, from the UNC in New Orleans, which is the children's hospital, the sort of Greater New Orleans Operating Trust, to the general operators of Lafayette General Hospital and all around the state, have said, if you do not budget for this in the next 2 weeks, we will remove our contracts before June 30th, before there would be the end of the special session to actually fund it. And so what's going on is the Republican caucus said, okay, we started off with $1 billion budget. We got some extra money in. So the governor says we owe $700 billion. Henry says, no, it's $300 billion. We've protected tops, he thinks. And I'm not blaming Cameron alone. The Republican caucus is pretty much generally thinking this. We don't believe this is an issue. We believe that if we were to remove a lot of the state funding to the hospitals, basically fully privatized state hospitals, the Medicaid funding alone in the state budget would be enough to keep them in business. We basically say, you can have the hospitals, but we're not giving you any supplementary money. And that will eliminate the deficit, and we don't really have to raise taxes. You know what? This is a heck of a gamble. It is a game of chicken. They are running to the end of the cliff. Maybe they stop in time. Maybe we come to it. But right now, I don't see that the Republicans are talking to the governor talking to and anybody's coming through. And I'm terrified that in the next few weeks, we're going to see a situation where the major research hospitals, because the ones we subsidize this because they're med schools, they have medical students subsidized by the state, are going to say, you know what, we're walking away. Med students, you're out of luck. We'll see an exodus of med students from the state because there won't be a way to do residencies or internships. And a lot of the hospitals that actually take care of the poor under Medicaid, that see these patients no matter what, will close. Now, maybe I'm being hysterical.
Okay.
Maybe I'm being hysterical. Maybe I'm being ridiculous. This is the argument that is being made by the hospital heads and by the governor. Mm-hmm. Maybe Cameron Henry is right. maybe, if the hospitals are making money, there's no way they're going to go away. But it is a game of chicken, and I have no idea who wins this thing.
Okay, so one more issue. Let me put it up. I'm putting up a tweet right now. This is from Melinda Delott, AP. And it says, ask for an update on governor's race. Senator John Kennedy says, I'm thinking very seriously about it. I haven't made a decision. I don't think that Governor Edwards has been an effective governor. He hasn't done anything. No timeline for decision. That's what Melinda said. So I put that up because obviously, right now the legislature, it's not just people who might be running for governor, such as John Kennedy, but it's also people in the legislature who are thinking about running for re-election for their own seat. And so I'm just wondering, at what point in time does it do the legislators really begin to think really seriously about their political future? Are they thinking about it now? I guess in terms of percentages,
over 2/3 of both houses are term limited.
Wait,
2/3 over 2/3 of both houses are term limited.
They can't.
Run
for the present office, but
for the present office, they can run for another one. Yeah.
And what you're going to see some jumping where senators. I've seen several senators up in North Louisiana. Senator Francis Thompson and several other senators are going to run to the House. Mm-hmm. And the interesting joke around will John Alario, who's been in office longer than Methuselah himself, who's been Speaker of the House of Representatives, President of the Senate. Now he's term limited in the Senate. Is he the next Speaker of the House of Representatives going back to the House? So, but Chris is right. There is going to be a tremendous turnover, Steve. And to answer your question, Steve, in the special session of the legislature, I wrote about this on Bayou Buzz a month or so ago. When the special session took place and nothing happened at all, no dollars were raised of any kind. There were 47 fundraisers given around the state capitol by legislators that were here in Baton Rouge. So when you say the jockeying going on, there's a lot of jockeying going on in terms of who retires, who runs for something else. Do you run against your best buddy? I know a personal situation where two seatmates in the House have an open Senate race. They both want to run for the Senate. They're very close friends. What do they do? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that jockeying going on right now, even though the statewide election is about a year and a half off. That's going on right now. Mm-hmm. Kennedy, and you mentioned Kennedy. A lot of people in Baton Rouge don't like John Kennedy. He took on a lot of special interests, very much against monies going to local government and a lot of issues. He was never very popular around the state capitol, but he's kind of like David Vitter. David Vitter was never very popular around the state capitol and just roared into a U.S. Senate race and should have been governor, but by his own scenario was not elected. Kennedy follows that line. He's getting a lot of play in Washington. I see him on television every other day, it seems like, mm-hmm. and taking his pot shots at Louisiana. He's going to be a very strong contender for governor, certainly the favorite, in my opinion, from the getting the Republican nomination. Is going to stand toe-to-toe with the incumbent governor. That's going to be one heck of a race, quite frankly.
If he decides not to run, given the fact that 2/3 of the legislature are term limited, as you say, there's that raises the possibility, at least, of some of these current legislators to say, well, I have as much of a chance of running or being governor, at least especially Republicans, saying I have as much of a chance of being. Look at John Bell Edwards, So I wasn't. I thought it was 1/3. So when you mentioned 2/3, that just means a lot of people have a lot of their future to think about.
Yeah, it's a little higher in the Senate, a little less in the House, but this is the class of 2007 hitting their term limit point. And there's going to be a lot of flipping. And not only, Jim, by the way, have I heard John Ilario being spoken about as being the next speaker, I've heard John Ilario speak about being the next speaker. So I actually think Methuselah will return. I'm waiting to exhume Johnny Hankel to see whether or not he's going to run. But it comes through that there's going to be jumping. I think the real wild card in the governor's race, of course, is Attorney General Jeff Landry, who's been effectively running since the moment John Bel Edwards was sworn in, and he was as AG. I think that what does Jeff Landry do? And that creates an interesting dynamic. He and Kennedy don't like each other. There is an interesting inter-party thing. Louis Gervich, the new GOP chairman succeeding Roger Villery, is very close to Kennedy. Not so much to Landry, though they have a good relationship. It's not bad. It's just, it's a personal thing. If what you say happens, that you just, and I think you're going to see a lot of people in the down ticket race, Secretary of State, which is going to be an open seat, a lot of people just trying to throw their ends in. Mm-hmm. But if let's say there's 7, 8, 9 Republicans in a race, and there's John Bel Edwards as a Democrat with one other. Well, that creates an interesting scenario, especially if it's an African-American Democrat who decides to get in. That could you do what's happening in California, where multiple Republican candidates are making it look like that the runoff is going to be between 2 Democrats, the former mayor of Los Angeles, Villaroso, and Gavin Newsom, and just an all-Democratic runoff. I don't know. I doubt that, to be honest. I'm just saying that. But it does create interesting people who will be looking for places to go. My only point about what you said is everybody's throwing the dice right now for races. That's what term limits does. It's the positive part of term limits because it says, you know what? I'm not worried about just keeping this office. The negative part of it is when you're throwing the dice, it could come up craps. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. Maybe Henry's right. Maybe everybody else is wrong. And there's a logic point to it. If a hospital is making money, what does it? But I will tell you, if we don't have a budget of some sort in the next 7 to 10 days at the outside, you're going to start seeing hospitals say, you know what? We're giving you back the hospital. You figure out in the next 2 months how to staff it, how to outfit it, and how to fund it. Goodbye.
So actually tomorrow's a big day. That's when we find out how much money we have, or expect to have. So that's going to be and
there is one other side to it. There was we ran a surplus of $150 million last year, and there was a move to use it to plug one of the budget months for healthcare and shift that month into the next year, which could be done. It's running astern of the one-time money laws,
right? That's what
but it could have done. Yeah, and the governor and particularly Commission Administration Jay Darden shot it down. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to require, I think, that to happen, which will mask the deficit. It doesn't reduce the deficit, but it masks it by another $150 million, and that could be part of the conversation as well.
I'd be very disappointed to do that. Okay, well, I think we've covered all the waterfronts for sure. So those people watching live, please go ahead and share. Those people who are watching later on, please go ahead and share. Thank you guys. I really do appreciate it. Very, very interesting discussion. If you don't mind, hold on. I'm going to. By the way, tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Jan Mola from Louisiana Budget Project, LBP, and then on Friday we're going to be doing a show once again with Rob Manis. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Okay, so thank you again, guys. I really do appreciate you taking your time. I'm sorry that we went further and longer than I had anticipated.